Welcome to 5 Good Minutes.
You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Ecclesiastes with Kurt Bjorklund.
So at the end of Ecclesiastes, I just want to go back and just ask a really simple question about this book. And that is, as I think about it, as you think about it, what is the great takeaway of the book? Here's what a man named Harold Brown says. He says this: from Proverbs, we learn to turn to another book in the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. It's quite different from Proverbs. In the book, there are serious warnings, but an underlying spirit is bright and joyous. Ecclesiastes is marked by a strain of morbidity and pessimism. We are in a totally different world. But it has a chapter-by-chapter theme that is oversimplified if we just try to get to it, but the leading ideas can be summarized in the following division. So what he's doing is he's saying, I'm not going to give you all the chapters, but here's a summary. So I'm giving you kind of a summary to lead to the lessons. Our limitations, he says, the aim of the preacher is to investigate life and its meaning, and he is deeply frustrated at times because he finds it difficult to imagine that there's any meaning in life. Things just happen. Even in nature, there's a continual round of events. Men and women might try to use their intellectual powers to reason things out, but they're bound to be frustrated. The author fears that it is not specifically helpful even to be wise, because death awaits the wise and the foolish alike. His bitter conclusion is that he hates life, and it's this limited vision which makes this book a sad work. And nowhere is it more noticeable than the author's attitude to death. For him, there is little joy after the grave, in the uncertain work beyond what men and women seem no better off than beasts. Then he talks about our pleasures, so our limitations. Secondly, our pleasures. Because human life has such a serious limitation, the preacher suggests that it's natural for men and women to try to forget themselves and enjoy themselves whenever they can. These passages come together alongside those that we've just considered. It's as if the author cannot bear thinking too long about life, and so suggests that it's better to simply enjoy it. The trouble is that his pessimism continues to control his thinking, for he honestly admits that even pleasures don't really satisfy. Chapter 2, 1 through 11 is an example of this approach, ending as it does with the familiar event: all is vanity, everything is meaningless. And the preacher is filled with despair. But he begins to cheer up when he advises his congregation to enjoy their work. It's kind of a make the best of things philosophy. And then he talks about our neighbors. Under this heading, we should include passages like 4 through 16, 7, 1 through 10, 9, 7 through 18, 10, 1 through 20. And he talks about the importance of valuing companionship, a good name, wise correction, patience, obedience to the king or rulers, contentment with a home, and wisdom. And he says, chapter 10 is a collection of short sayings about good and bad behavior in the community and is similar in style to Proverbs. For example, in its exhortations to avoid gossip or to be aware of ignorant people who are suddenly promoted to positions of authority. In it is the condemnation of laziness and its warning to be careful what you say to other people. And then he ends by saying, our Maker is the theme. So for him, it's a book about our limitations, about the limits of pleasure, the importance of relationships, but ultimately the importance of our Maker. Ecclesiastes has more to say about men and women than about God. Throughout the book, one hears more about what Wordsworth called the still, sad music of humanity than the majestic chords and uplifting cadences about God. But here and there, we come across a superb passage about men and women in their relationship to God. And then here's what he says. We're called to honor God, chapter 5, verses 1 through 8. We're called to trust him, chapter 7, 11 through 29. To remember him, chapter 11, 9 through 27. To worship him, chapter 12, 13. And to obey him, chapters 12 and 13. So, we're limited. Our pleasures don't amount to a lot. Invest in people, but he says ultimately we're called to honor God, to trust God, to worship God, to remember God, and to obey God. What would it look like for you today to choose to worship God, honor God, obey God in a way that is even more substantial than what you've done to this point? And in light of our limitations, this world, that is the most reasonable thing to do.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.